Welcome, everybody. Welcome to episode number 127 of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. I am your host, Mike Ayalon, CEO of Greek University. We call these episodes Fraternity Foodie because there is nothing like great food to bring people together. Today, we have with us Robert Alberts, an experienced student affairs professional with a demonstrated history of working in the civic and social organization industry. Robert works for Northern Arizona University, and he is skilled in crisis management, interviewing, social media, editing, you name it. Welcome to the show, Robert.
Thank you. I feel super excited and hyped up. I wish you could give that introduction to everybody I meet because I just feel so confident right now in all of my skills.
I can do that. You know, it wouldn't be the first time that somebody had asked me to do an intro. They're like, can you just hype me up? I want to walk into the room feeling really good.
Exactly.
All right, so let's give our audience a little background about you. You chose Illinois State for your undergraduate experience. So why was this the right choice for you?
You know, it's probably one of my favorite stories to ever tell, especially to incoming students. So I'm from the north suburbs of Chicago. My family lives about 3 hours away from Illinois State. And when I was touring schools, I was set on a completely different school. And when I say I was set, my dad had to drag me kicking and screaming out to the car to just do the visit. And so we were driving down and for 3 hours, complete silence. Did not want to talk to him, did not want to engage. I'm sure he loved every second of that. And he parked in the wrong parking lot. And I will never forget, he parked in the wrong parking lot and we had to walk across campus and I was just fuming. I was so upset. And we walked onto the quad and I was like, oh, this is the school I'm going to. I'm done. And I remember looking at him being like, I don't need to do this tour anymore. And I think that was the breaking moment for him where he just lost his bananas and was like, we are doing this. We are already here. And I was like, no. I'm going here. This is my school. And it was honestly I don't know if I could give you a tangible reason. I think for me, it felt like the perfect fit. It was beautiful and it felt like I was meant to go there. And even at this moment in time, I still get some of those feelings of oh, I meant to make this decision. And looking back, it was one of the best decisions I ever could have made.
Such a cool story. I absolutely love it. And you were a very involved student there at Illinois State. You
Yes.
served as RA, Midwest Bisexual, Lesbian, Gay, Transgender, and Ally College Conference Director, student specialist for transfer and off-campus students. So how did all of these experiences shape and direct your future direction professionally?
I learned that I need to exercise restraint when seeking opportunities. I think for me, I really like schools that are mid-sized or smaller institutions because you get to connect with people really well. And I think a lot of that's what happened with me is that I got to connect with amazing staff and amazing folks in different offices and really see a lot of the potential that happened. And so I think for me, being an RA, quite honestly, a lot of our students, was the only way I was going to afford college. Being an RA was a cool opportunity and a cool experience, and working in residential life now, love working with RAs. But for me, I was solely in it for the money. Because I wouldn't have been able to make ends meet. And so as the first one of my siblings to go to college, my parents weren't in a financial position to really help me. And so that was quite honestly the biggest way I was able to attend. And then once I got involved, it just more and more opportunities started coming up. And so I remember attending the first, there's different ways to say it. I call it mumble talk. People will say it different ways. There's no great way to say all of that string of letters because there's one vowel in it and that's it. But I went to Iowa State in 2012 and I was on my way home and man, I was like, it would be so cool to do this here. And I think that really kickstarted my connections to folks on campus. So it was really fun. I spent a year planning a bid proposal, a 60-page document that was just way over the top. And then I spent 2 years planning it with an amazing planning team. I'm still friends with a lot of them to this day. And it was a really, really fun experience. that looking back, I honestly wish I could do again. You know, I got to work with amazing speakers like Laverne Cox came to our conference. I got to work with Reverend Dr. Jamie Washington, who runs the Social Justice Institute. I got to work with a number of really amazing people at that conference, and so it was an amazing opportunity. And now I volunteer with the organization that assists college students that are planning this conference, because from when the conference started in 1993, which I would like to say it started the same year I was born, and continued on until 2015 with my conference, when we voted to actually go down the route of creating a nonprofit. It was run and maintained and continued by only undergraduate students. There was no staff, there was no faculty, there was no institutional anything holding on to it. It was like sheer force of will by students in the Midwest that were determined this was going to be the thing that was going to continue. And so, it's continued even still. We had to take a break because of the pandemic, but we're still planning to have some conference, whether that's virtual, in person, a hybrid, in October at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So it's really, really exciting because folks get to travel around the Midwest, and I can't talk highly enough about it. It's probably one of my favorite experiences from undergrad.
Wow, what an incredible experience. And it's followed you all the way here until today, which is just incredible, right? Wow. All right. So now you're at Northern Arizona University. You serve as coordinator for Res Life student assistance and student conduct. What types of things are you working on in this position at Northern Arizona?
12 months ago would probably be a really different conversation. I've kind of distilled my job down into 3 C's. It's the best way that I can kind of explain it. So the first C is I do conduct. So any misconduct that happens, we have between 8,000 and 10,000 beds on our campus. And any misconduct that happens, it comes from the Office of the Dean of Students over to me. And I determine, is this appropriate for a graduate student to hear, or a full-time hall director to hear, or is this something that I need to take on? And so kind of determining what's the best educational route for the student. How do we intervene in a way that gives the student a great opportunity to learn and grow, and make different decisions in the future if that's something they want to do. So that's one component. The other conduct piece is that, I work with the Office of the Dean of Students to maintain and to implement new softwares, new products, new policies and practices across between our 2 offices. And I train our staff, I train our hall directors, I train our RAs and our graduate students on how to handle situations of misconduct or potential policy violations in the most appropriate way. So that's the first C. The second C is that I do all of our care students. So anyone who's been identified in any capacity, from something as small as falling down and hurting their ankle, all the way up to being hospitalized or potentially withdrawing from the university. I work with the other care managers on campus in order to develop wraparound services for them, and to refer them to offices as they need to. And in that role, I supervise 3 bachelors of social work students that are doing their internships. And so they do a lot of the care outreach and the follow-up. And so supervising social work students is probably my favorite thing ever in the world, because it's so cool to work with undergraduate students in that capacity. And then the last C is I work with all of our COVID processes on campus. So I manage all residential life, COVID, quarantine housing, isolation housing, working with campus health and the Office of the Dean of Students, and all of those pieces to implement our processes, manage our case notes. I supervise 6 part-time care managers that do a lot of the phone calls and outreach. I do a lot of data and assessment for our vice president and for our president, and a lot of those pieces. So it's probably the most flexible thing I've ever had to be in my entire life. And I make the joke all the time with our campus health folks that I'm getting an honorary master's in public health at the end of this, because I have learned so much about COVID that at this point it surprises me sometimes. So those are the 3 big things. And then honestly, another big piece of my job is I talk to a lot of parents. Parents love talking with me for some reason. I like to think I'm funny. They like to think I'm helpful. But regardless, we get to the end and it's all resolved there. So yeah, those are the 3 big pieces that I do. I also do little stuff like I help run and manage our social media accounts. So when the pandemic hit, we really had to take a look at how are we engaging students, both potential students and current students. And so one of the things that was tasked to us was like, hey, why don't we start social media? And, because I'm the youngest person in the room most of the time, that falls to me, which is, a great opportunity, but definitely leaning into that millennial generation there. And so it's been really cool, developed 17 different social media accounts, work with our hall directors to manage it, do a lot of data reports and assessment for our associate vice president and our vice president to show that we're actually engaging and connecting with students. And so that's been a really cool opportunity too. That's caused a lot of growth because I've run my own social media accounts before. You can follow me on Instagram and Twitter, but never in like an official, not an official capacity, but through the office has been a unique experience.
Wow, your job is absolutely huge. I mean, I don't even know how you get your arms around it. I don't know when you sleep. I mean, you are like a machine. I mean, that is just incredible. And listen, there's a lot of college students that are listening to this right now. And you live in Arizona. I live in Tennessee. We know that in Texas, the mask mandate is basically gone. And I think that Tennessee and Arizona are going to follow suit very quickly. So, I mean, talk to us just for a moment, as if, there are students who are listening right now, when you're dealing in these conduct issues, and I'm sure you have many that surround COVID and not wearing masks and people gathering in groups, what is that conversation like when you're in a conduct situation?
Yeah, I think it's hard because our country has done an absolute garbage job at educating people on the virus and the impacts that it has, right? Like we know from the CDC and the World Health Organization that college students most of the time, if they get the virus, they generally survive pretty well, right? Because a big problem with the virus is those coexisting conditions like diabetes or an impact to your heart or your kidneys. And so what I think people don't understand is that they don't know who of their friends might have an underlying condition that you're putting at risk, right? And you don't know because you just genuinely don't know that. And so I think a lot of the time our college students hear either like, oh, it's like the flu, it's not that big of a deal, or it's gotten turned into this political sort of thing. And so a lot of the time, the conversations that I have around is, how do you make good decisions that the potential outcomes for? That's a big thing with me of like, you can make whatever decision you want to. I support you being an adult and making your decisions in a way that feels the most empowering and the most truthful for who you are as a human. What I don't want to have happen is for you to make a decision and not know that there's a potential outcome and be sitting there and be like, oh shit, I didn't realize this was going to happen. Because that doesn't put anyone in a good spot. And so, I can tell people to wear masks. I can tell people to stop drinking. But at the end of the day, people are going to make their own decisions. And for me, when I talk with college students, it's really about how can you keep yourself and your friends safe? Because imagine the worst possible outcome and knowing that you could have potentially prevented that by putting a piece of cloth over your face and over your nose and mouth. Like if in 10 years we find out that that didn't actually do anything, awesome. At least I took a step to help protect people that I care about rather than just kind of leaving it up to chance. So that's the kind of conversations that I have with students.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. I think that's really helpful to all of our listeners. And I'm also blown away at all of your volunteer roles because you're a chapter counselor and a district chief with Beta Theta Pi. And I'm wondering, how did you develop this relationship with the fraternity? And then you got initiated as an alumnus. And I think there are many of our listeners right now that don't even know that you can actually have alumni initiations for people in your community that just were never initiated, that maybe are helping your chapter or your council. So, how did this relationship develop with Beta Theta Pi?
Yeah, this is actually probably one of my favorite stories to tell now that I've like refined it down. And the first question I ask that I'll ask you, Michael, is do you remember the first time you fell in love?
Of course.
Well, tell me what that was like. What was that like for you?
Oh my gosh. I remember butterflies in my stomach. I remember thinking, about this relationship literally 24/7. I remember telling all of my friends. I
Yep.
remember even having a conversation with my parents about it. So those are kind of the things that immediately rush back that I can put my finger on it and say that was the moment.
So I want you to hold on to all of those feelings. And I tell people to hold on to all of those. I started dating someone in high school. We dated actually for quite a while. And that person, he went to college. So we were a year apart. So I went to college first. He went to college second. And he went out to the East Coast. He was the most intelligent person I've ever met in my life. And where he ended up was great. And I remember getting a phone call my sophomore year. I was on call as an RA, and as you are. I remember his friend was calling me at like some ridiculous time, like 11:30 or midnight, but they were both on the East Coast, so it was like 1 a.m. their time. And he called me, and I just remember them saying they found him in his room and he's dead. And so hold on to that like first love of like, oh my God. And he joined Beta Theta Pi. And I remember this like intense anger and disappointment that your fraternity brothers could just leave you in a situation like that, right? Like I didn't know any of the specifics surrounding it. I didn't know what happened. But for me, it was one of those moments of like, how dare they? And it immediately put me off from ever joining a fraternity. I remember that I never wanted to do that. And then as a senior, when I was looking at grad schools, I was like, I've done programming, I've done leadership development, I've done housing and residential life, I've done diversity and equity work. But the one thing I haven't done is work in fraternity and sorority life. And so I actually got an assistantship where I did fraternity and sorority housing, which was a blast. I loved it. I love working with fraternities and sororities. And I think that moment for me was pivotal. It really changed the way that I looked at fraternities and sororities in a way that I wish would have happened years earlier. So then I graduated, right? And I went to a really small school. I went to the University of Nebraska at Kearney for my master's program, which was great. I got to do a lot of different things, but I was like, you know what? I want to go to a much bigger school. So I picked the biggest school in the country for my first job. And a week after I got there, I had a friend who I worked with who was a part of who was a part of another fraternity, but had gotten reached out to and was like, hey, there's this advising opportunity. Do you want to come to lunch with me? And I was like, yeah, sure. And I remember sitting down, and I'll never forget the colony development coordinator who was there. And he basically passed this file across, like this folder, and was like, hey, I want to talk to you about advising. And I looked down, and it was Beta Theta Pi. And I just remember being like, wow, oh my God, like the universe is telling me something. And so I think for me, like when I first initially thought about volunteering for Beta, it was really about connecting back to that love, right? Connecting back to that first experience. And I think what kept me there is that I've been able to have such amazing relationships with the men in the chapter, with my brothers now that are alumni and still engaged, with folks at the administrative offices. And I think for me, that's what keeps me coming back, quite honestly, is that love and care and passion for working with fraternity men. Getting initiated as an alum is a unique experience. One of the things I was actually supposed to get initiated at convention, on the convention floor, which I'm disappointed did not happen. But COVID has impacted lots of people in lots of different ways. And the actual initiation I had was, a socially distanced one with the alumni that I had worked with that were volunteers with me. And so not that it was more or less impactful, but having men that I have worked with for the last 4 years, facilitate that ceremony was just probably one of the highlights that I'll treasure forever in my life. So yeah, I think the big thing that I want collegians to know is that an alumni initiation is almost based a little bit more in recognizing the devotion and the work that goes into working with chapters, because not having an affiliated member volunteer and spend their time because they're passionate, because they're excited about your organization, means that they're probably already demonstrating the values you espouse. They just don't have letters to go with that. And so it's about you welcoming them into your chapter, to your organization, because you'll already know that they're a member, or you will already know that they've contributed so much. And so it's a way to recognize them.
What a beautiful story. And I love how you have framed it up, a way to recognize them for the work that they've put in. It's such a beautiful gift that you can give an alumnus who never joined a fraternity or sorority. And so why not? Why not give that gift? Why not have another ally that works for the administration of the university that you're at, that can be a supporter for you, that can be a fan? And so to me, it's one of those really underutilized things that fraternities and sororities have the ability to do. And so thank you for placing a light on that. And hopefully some of the listeners now will start to think about the other administrators that are, in and around them that maybe are unaffiliated, that they never had the opportunity, and all they're waiting for is somebody to ask them. And if they were asked, they would probably say, of course, because they've been working with you all along. But you just have to ask that question. And so that's a wonderful story. And I like how it came full circle for you. That's just incredible. You also do work with Delta Gamma with alcohol skills training. So tell our audience a little bit about what that program looks like for sorority women.
Yeah, so the alcohol skills training program originally came out of the University of Washington and their alcohol education lab. And so a lot of what the program is centered around is harm reduction. We know that students like to drink, right? And students do choose to engage in those behaviors. Well, we're going to tell you if you're not 21, you shouldn't drink. But at the end of the day, if you want to do so, here's how you do it safely. Here's how you protect your brothers and sisters in a way that keeps everybody safe. And reduces that harm. And there are some probably administrators that would hear that and say like, oh, well, you're encouraging drinking, or you're not saying that people shouldn't do it. And it's like, at the end of the day, most health promotion and most health educators would argue that a harm reduction model actually reduces much more behavior in a much more significant way that could be harmful, because you're not telling people not to do it. You're not telling people like that they shouldn't or that they can't. You're giving them information. You're empowering them to make informed decisions in a way that helps them choose what's best for them. And so that's kind of how I work most of my job. That's how I live most of my life. It's how I advise my organization of you can make whatever decisions you want to. Let me give you the information so you can make a good informed one. And so that's a lot of what the program is about.
Yeah, we have the same exact approach. I basically arm the students with, these are the activities and the things that you can do before you go out drinking, if that's what you choose to do. This is what you should be doing while you are drinking, if that's what you choose to do. And this is what you should be thinking about after you leave. And I think if we can give that to the students and have them think about those things, they're going to make whatever decision they're going to make. You and I are not going to be there when they make that decision, right? We're not going to be over their shoulder saying, do you really want to do this? They're going to make that decision on their own. We just need to make sure that they can do it safely if that's the decision that they're going to make.
Absolutely. And they feel like they've got good information to make that decision.
100%. And if we can save a life doing it, why wouldn't we? It's all about coming down on that ladder, right? If you picture this ladder, we're coming down and we're taking steps to make that safer. Are we going all the way down to the bottom rung? Probably not, but I'm also not naive about what happens on college campuses. So I have to be realistic and I have to meet the students where they're at, right? And that's where they're at right now. If I can just bring them down a notch, then I feel good about that. And so, hopefully over time we can continue to move down the ladder. And I do think that a lot of the things that we've been doing, I mean, if you look at cigarette usage, for example, over the last 20 years, I mean, those awareness campaigns are working. I mean, cigarette usage right now is like at an all-time low over the last 20 years. So these awareness campaigns are working. We just have to keep working at it. That's all.
Exactly. And I know that it's hard sometimes for people to talk about with others, especially their peers. And so a lot of the time I talk about how do you have a conversation about potential, right? What could it look like to do something differently? Not that you have to change, but if you were to, what could that look like? Or what could that feel like? Or what kind of conversation could you have with someone to say, hey, I care about you. I see this behavior. Are you doing okay? Because that gentle check-in could really make a difference in curbing some behaviors that are unsafe.
Yeah, I like that. Now, we should talk a little bit about crisis management for our listeners, because I don't think today's fraternities and sororities are talking enough about crisis management and what is the plan. I ask that question all the time when I meet with fraternities and sororities, the chapters, and I'm like, what's the crisis management plan? And people look at me like, they have no idea. What are you talking about, right? So if a chapter is listening right now, and let's assume a week from now, this weekend, whatever, they're facing a crisis, what steps should they be taking?
Yeah, number one is, you need someone in a coherent state to take charge. Someone that is knowledgeable, feels empowered, and knows their resources, number one. Number two, and this is me, especially being in housing residential life, call me at 1 o'clock in the morning. Do not call me at 10 a.m. the next day because I will lose my bananas, right? Like, let me be there to support you in the moment because this shouldn't all fall on you. I also think a lot of the times is that people are worried that if they, call 911 or call the police or call for an ambulance, that people are going to get in trouble. And I can't say enough that at the end of the day, the priority is keeping people alive and safe. We can deal with everything after that. Like that is everything else we can deal with later. That's the priority in the moment. And so whatever we need to do to make that happen, let's make that happen. And I think the other thing too is just being knowledgeable, right? Like one of the biggest things that impacts college students and impacts our fraternities and sororities, but mostly our fraternities, right? The number one insurance claim that we all know is a fall from heights, right? We all know that because people decide they want to climb onto the roof or some nonsense like that, right? Like having basic first aid skills is not only something that's great for like your life, but like could be helpful for you in that moment, right? Being educated on the impacts of like what alcohol poisoning looks like and how to take care of someone. Again, a great resource for the rest of your life and for that moment. I also think you've got kind of two people in crisis situations. You've got people who panic, right? And then you've got people who try and take charge. And so it's really about making sure that you don't have 9 chefs in the kitchen, but that your organization has really determined this is the person who's going to be in charge when or if something happens. So I'll give you an example. My fraternity men went to Vegas for the first time for a formal last year, 2 years ago, I don't remember. I had a lot of anxiety because they were a colony. They'd never done this before. I couldn't go with them. But we made a really great game plan of like, this person is going to be in charge of all of our actives and their dates. This person is going to be in charge of all of the new members and their dates. And this person is going to work with the 2 people who are in charge of the 2 groups to manage everything. And this is what our process is going to look like, right? So there's those 2 pieces. I would also say, and this isn't meant to be mean to any international organizations or any administrative offices, but if you don't follow your risk management policies, you are not getting help. You will not get saved. No one is coming to your rescue because you didn't follow the policies where someone could protect you. And that's not meant to diffuse the responsibility from the administrative office and their staff or from the institution. I really say that to mean like you should really be knowledgeable about that so that way you can protect yourself. Similar to the conversation we were having before, right? Like how do we make good informed decisions with the information that we have to make sure we know the potential outcomes? So yeah, the biggest thing honestly in a crisis is being calm, taking one step at a time. There's no rush. And reaching out for help. You're not supposed to do this alone. Like I don't even do this alone, right? Like there's a team. So
yeah, that's all great points. The things that I take out of, your comments, get off the roof. If you're on the roof, you really have no business being on the roof unless you're a professional roofer. There's no reason for you to be up on the roof. I'm telling you, as somebody who worked for the headquarters as an executive director, the biggest claims that we have is somebody fell off the roof. There's no reason for them to be up there. And so it drives me bananas. And so just get off the roof. That's number one. Number two, if you willfully ignore your risk management rules, i.e. you're bringing kegs into your house, you are not going to be covered. Your insurance is worthless. It's worthless. You're paying all of this money for liability insurance, and you might as well just flush it down the toilet because you are willfully ignoring your risk management rules. Please don't do that. That's really, really important. So, and the last thing is just call 911 if you get into a problem. I mean, it's such a basic thing. They're in the news, the latest hazing death that came out of VCU recently over the past couple of days, just horrific. And it seems like there was a head injury, and about these head injuries within fraternities, and all you have to do is just call 911. Somebody's got a head injury. Call 911, save a life. That's the most important thing. Save a life, and then Robert and I will figure out the rest. Just make sure that the student is safe. Period. Yeah. Save a life.
That's it. That's the number one thing. And we can figure everything out later.
Right. But if you don't call for 911, then there's nothing that we can do. It's too late. Right? I mean, the next day, it's too late. 24 hours later, he had a head injury that could have been prevented. And now here we go. So anyway, Enough about that. Ay, ay, ay. All right. So, we mentioned this before, but you're also on the board of directors for the Midwest Bisexual, Lesbian, Gay, Transgender, and Ally College Conference. So I'm just wondering, what do you see for the future of this particular conference? What's coming up?
You ask such a great question. Such a great question. I think, there's a lot of potential. So people generally think of the Midwest, and they think of the Midwest in kind of two categories, right? They either think of like, I don't know if you've ever driven through I-80 through Iowa. Iowa's great. My best friend lives there, and that drive is horrible. It is the most horrible drive in the world, right? So they either think of like giant, just rolling plains of corn and soybeans. The most exciting part is when it switches from corn to soybeans and then back, right? Or they think about like Minneapolis or Chicago or Detroit or Cleveland, right? Like those are the two kind of pieces. And I think what's come up for us a lot in our conversations is that queer people in the Midwest have a variety of experiences, because some people live on a farm where they live in a municipality. They don't live in a city or in a county, right? Like they don't have that experience. And then there's some people who live in the heart of downtown Chicago, right? And the scene there is so different. And so I think what you'll see more and more often is that people are coming from such different experiences, but looking for community. I've seen some research that says, Gen Z is starting to identify as a collective, a little bit more expansive in their gender identity and sexual orientation, which is awesome. But it also means that there's still a lot of potential for us to create more meaningful and more long-lasting relationships and community spaces, because a lot of folks don't necessarily have the space, energy, time, or support to really find community in a way that's helpful, right? I remember being a 16-year-old kid being like, oh God, I feel this way. And there was no one for me to turn to, right? Like I didn't, besides my friends at school, like I didn't have that support system. And so, really developing and identifying what are ways that we can continue to support queer folks in the Midwest. And I think that's the big challenge moving forward, especially knowing that like Black trans women and undocumented trans women specifically have lower lifespans, lower life expectancy, right? Like are more likely to experience bias in crimes and assault, right? The average Black trans woman's life is expected to be around 32 years old, right? As someone who's going to be 28 soon, like that's 4 years away from where I'm at. And so the reality is like understanding both of those components of how do we create community and how do we start giving people space where they can be safe and can be themselves. And so I think that's what's really on the horizon, not just in the Midwest, but I think nationally. So I could talk for hours about that.
Yeah, that's wonderful work. The other thing that I'm seeing within Panelistic, especially, which I think is amazing, is a lot of this diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And at Gamma Phi Beta, you are a belonging, equity, diversion, and inclusion team leader. So explain to our chapters that are listening right now, what does a good diversity and equity plan look like for a chapter?
Wow, you're just like really asking big questions today.
Sure.
Quite honestly, one of the things that I find chapters not miss the mark. Sometimes I think chapters really focus on the easy, tangible things, right? Like they want to feel success. And sometimes that means that they're going to do something easy, like go and attend a speaker. Great learning opportunity, not a plan.
Mhm.
They want to do a diversity event or like an inclusion event where they bring someone in and talk to their chapter about racism. Awesome, great development opportunity for your members, right? Great member education opportunity, not a plan. And so I think one of the big things that chapters have to do is that they have to look internally at their practices and procedures. I love working with Panhellenic women. Panhellenic recruitment is my favorite. If I could get a job full time where I traveled around the country doing Panhellenic recruitment, I would be there yesterday. And we need to look at some of the practices in Panhellenic recruitment.
Yeah.
Making sure all of your women wear the same outfit, that's a huge cost. Think about your first generation women. Think about women who send money home to support their families. Think about women who come from low income families, right? Like think about those folks and how you're unduly impacting them. Is it really necessary for you to all have the same shade of teal? Or is it important to have authentic conversations with PNMs that are coming into your organization, right?
Mm-hmm.
So recruitment, again, another thing I could talk about all day, every day about the equity piece of being in recruitment, but I also think it's really about examining some of those other practices, examining some of the things you do day in and day out that make an impact. I'm working with a chapter right now that does a great job of recruiting women of color, an amazing job. And then all of those women of color disaffiliate the next semester.
Oh, no.
You lose an incredible opportunity for your chapter by having tons of diverse voices at the table. But if you can't keep folks like that there, how are you ever expecting to really make progress? And I think a lot of the things, especially in the National Panelistic like conference, the one issue that we run into all the time is that, you know, for white folks like us, it's really hard to talk about race. For folks that have a lot of money, it's really hard to talk about socioeconomic status. But at the end of the day, when we're having these conversations, it's not about you as a person, right? And I don't say this to be mean, but a lot of the time, the conversations I have is like, you're not important enough to maintain this entire system. Like you as a person don't have that power. But by not challenging that power, you're not doing anything to help the system, right? It's still going to disenfranchise people. And so a lot of the work that we're doing right now, that Gamify Beta is really doing, that I like commend them for, is they're taking a really, really hard look at race in our organizations and how race impacts everything. And, you know, there's different components, right? Every single chapter is creating a plan. I supervise the 9 specialists that cover the regions. So each region has one specialist that works with their Betty chairwoman to establish a plan for the entire chapter to move them forward. Because every time I talk with the Betty chairwoman or with my specialist, it's about progress. It's not about achievement, right? Like that for me is the hill that I will die on forever, is that it's always about progress. How can we make one step forward? It doesn't matter anything else that we do. If we made a step forward, we've been successful, right? And so I think chapters really need to do an introspection. They really need to think about how they're perpetuating harm, because we, like, as people who joined historically white fraternities and sororities, we perpetuate harm on a daily basis because our organization like excluded members of color.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like the whole reason that the National Panhellenic Conference or Council got started with the historically divided 9 fraternities and sororities, not the whole reason, but a big piece of that is that our historically white fraternities and sororities did not admit members of color, specifically Black members, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so there wasn't an opportunity for those folks to join our organizations. And so our organizations were built off of white supremacy. And we really need to take a look holistically at the foundation and really examine, is this something that's going to be good for us? Is this something that we can continue, or do we need to take a look at our values, take a look at what it means to be a fraternity man or sorority woman, and can we really re-examine what our culture of our organization looks like? And it's hard. It's so hard to do. It's probably the hardest work ever, because we're talking about us as people, and we're talking about our chapters that we love, and the brothers and sisters that we have that meant and mean the world to us, and the organizations that gave us those opportunities, right? And we're being critical, but that criticism and that focus moving forward, that's the important piece. Like if you're not there asking hard questions and doing hard work that's messy and uncomfortable, then you know it's not really taking you anywhere.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Well, you've given us a lot to think about here, and I know that we could probably spend the next 2 hours talking about fraternity and sorority.
Yes.
So, but this has been absolutely fantastic. You know that we love good food here at Fraternity
Yes.
Foodie. So, what is your favorite restaurant in the Flagstaff, Arizona area, and what do you like to order?
Oh man. Okay. I have like several of them. Um, Living in Arizona, we have the best Mexican food in the entire world. I don't care what Southern California thinks. Arizona's where it's at. However, there's a really great like sandwich and butcher shop in downtown Flagstaff called Proper Meats and Provisions,
Mhm.
and just amazing. Like all of their food is amazing, but their fried chicken that they do on Thursdays is just a game changer. It is incredible. I firmly believe you can go there and order anything. It would be fantastic. But it's probably one of my favorites. I also go there way too often because they know who I am and what my order is by heart. But it's worth it. It's so good. It's my favorite thing. in
Those
the
are the
world.
best places when you just walk in, you don't have to say a word. They know exactly what you want and they bring it out. You're like, this is it.
Right?
Thank you. Like
It's
one thing in my life is easy.
exactly. And it's so good. I think that's the hard part is that like it's so good and I can eat all of their food and just never get tired of it.
Oh,
That's the
God bless.
problem.
All right, that sounds wonderful. So if our listeners have additional questions for you, is there a place they can go to connect with you, maybe on social media?
100%. My Instagram and my Twitter both have the same Twitter handle, and it's my favorite Twitter handle, and we can talk about it later if you want to. But it's at a queer killjoy. Um, it's my favorite. Please follow me. I accept all followers. Everything's public, but you're going to get the unfettered, like real version of who I am as a person. So just know that before you hit that follow button.
I love it. That's what we're about here is real talk. So I really appreciate you. I love the work that you're doing at Northern Arizona. I think it's absolutely fantastic. You, like so many others in higher ed, you say yes to everything. And I see that you are so overcommitted. I just need to make sure that you're taking time for yourself too, amidst
Yes.
all of this, because this whole COVID thing that you've been experiencing for the last 12 months is over and on top of your usual duties. And I know how much stress that puts on you. And so I care about you. And I just want to make sure you're taking some time for yourself too.
Yes, my supervisor in our last one-on-one was like, so when are you going to take 3 weeks off? And I was like, whoa, 3 weeks is a while. But yes, definitely. I work out, go on runs. Flagstaff is beautiful. I get to go on hikes. It's gorgeous up here. So yes, a lot of time outdoors, a lot of time with friends, virtually, not in person, but
I love it. Very good. Well, thank you so much, Robert. And thank you to our listeners. If you like this conversation with Robert, please like it and share it. Make sure you follow him on Twitter and Instagram. And we hope to see you on another episode of Fraternity Foodie. Thanks so much. Bye for now.